a good time to get started. We'd like to thank you to attending Counselors for Social Justice, the Professional Development Committee. My name is Tina Onihoy. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Professional Development Committee. And today we are so privileged and grateful to offer a webinar for you on global warming and structural violence theory and application. Before we do get started, Counselors for Social Justice offers our members and the community as a whole opportunities to learn about advocacy for their clients and also for themselves. And we're really grateful again to have you here today. Before we do begin, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge Breonna Taylor's ruling. I know that it is a really painful time for a lot of people. And, I just want to acknowledge what happened, but I also want us to continue to fight the fight, recognize that this is a really painful experience, but we're just going to continue to fight. And I challenge you to just continue to advocate within your communities to make our voices heard, because there needs to be a healing that happens. There needs to be restoration of justice, and this is unacceptable, but we are just going to continue to press on and fight the fight. So that being said, just some housekeeping. So today's presentation, you'll see within the chat, there'll be messages from our lovely Professional Development Committee members. So we're grateful for being here today. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Rebecca. Very, very grateful for that. And so throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to ask any questions that you have, or you can place them in the chat and we'll be answering them along the way. Okay, so you don't have to feel you need to wait till the end. You can go ahead and say them throughout the time we have together. Okay, let's see. We do have, just want to tell you about upcoming presentations, trainings that we have. We do on November 5th, November 5th at 7 p.m., Dr. Judy Daniels is going to be presenting on advocacy competencies. And so we're really excited for that because it's going to be right after the elections. And so we want to understand how that's going to impact our life as clinicians and educators. And tentatively, we also have December 3rd at 7 p.m., the macro level of advocacy. We recognize a lot of people have been asking about, well, how do we do this work? And so we've heard your cries and we're answering them. And so that's coming up. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna introduce our presenter. Today we have Dr. Adil Torres Rivera, who is a professor and director of the Latinx Studies at Whitaker State University, Kansas. He is interested in group work, chaos theory, liberation psychology, technology, supervision, multicultural counseling, prisons, Puerto Rican studies, identity development, and gang-related behavior. Specifically, his primary research focuses on complexity and how indigenous healing techniques are a necessary ingredient when working with ethnic minority populations in the United States. His work has appeared in the Journal of Multicultural Counseling and Development, Journal of Counseling and Development, Journal of Addictions and Offender Counseling, Radical Psychology Journal, Journal of Humanistic Counseling, Education and Development, Intervention in School and Clinic Journal, Counselor Education and Supervision Journal, Journal for Specialists in Group Work, Journal of Psychological Practice, Educational Technology, Computers in the Schools, Counseling and Values Journal, Journal of Technology and Counseling, and the Canadian Journal of Counseling. He was part of the editorial boards of the Journal of Counseling and Development and the Counselor Education and Supervision Journal. Presently, he serves in the editorial boards of the Inter-American Journal of Psychology and the Journal for Social Action in Counseling and Psychology. Since 1995, Dr. Torres has presented papers at national and international conferences such as the American Psychological Association, American Counseling Association, the Association for Counseling, Education, and Supervision, the Association for Specialists in Group Work, National Latinx Psychology Association, the American Educational Research Association, and the Inter-American Society of Psychology. His invited presentations include workshops in North Carolina, Washington, and New Hampshire. He is the recipient of the Best Group Research Article of the Year, March 2000, the National Defense Service Medal, February 1990, the Army Commendation Medal, November 1986, the Army Achievement Medal, First Oak Leaf, August 1986, a fellow at the American Counseling Association, as well as the Specialists for Group Work and the Ohana Award for Social Justice in March 2004. We are so excited to have you, and without further ado, Dr. Adil.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I'm in Wichita State University, which is Kansas. So just kind of, Wichita, it's my home now, so it's kind of cool. So anyhow, so this is how I'm going to talk a little bit about global warming and structural violence. Okay, and then I'm going to give you some possible things to do. Okay. In case you haven't realized just now, social justice is not about anything else more than outcome, action. So anything that do not lead to action is not social justice, okay? Because it's not only theory. Theory is kind of nice and I like it and I love it, kind of thing. The theory is very nice, but into that theory, it starts to become an application, something that you can do something with. It doesn't work, okay? So anyhow, and that's not come from me, that come from Paulo Freire and Ignacio Martin Barro. So with that, let me kind of share my screen. By the way, also, I'm one of those who talk fast, okay? And because I talk fast, I usually finish things a little bit too fast. But if you have a question, please, you can interrupt me via chat, or you can raise your little finger in reaction, and I will try to answer the best I can, okay? So with that, let me share my screen. Did everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to put the presentation, because then when I do that, some of the letters you cannot see it. Okay, so I learned that this morning. So I wonder how many people think the global warming is not real. Let me put it that way. How many people think the global warming is not real? Hopefully, everybody who see it believe that this thing is real. I was in Puerto Rico during Maria. I was working in Virginia, and the breaks was usually in September. So I happened to go to Puerto Rico, and I was there during Maria. I had never experienced a hurricane my whole life. That was my first hurricane. After that time, somehow, somewhere along the line, I started to believe that there's something wrong in here, because the hurricane covered the whole island. And when people think it was a couple hours, for me, it was the longest 24 hours of my whole life, okay? So it's something interesting about global warming, okay? And it's not that it's a hoax, okay? So if you've been watching the news, now we got some storms that start to use the Greek alphabet, okay? Because we run out of names in our alphabet, okay? So you kind of look at what's happening right now, you will see that indeed, it's something is taking place. You see the Arctic you start to see that some things are taking place. And if you go to Florida, you're going to see that the big firms start to become closer and closer to homes that was not the same thing a couple of years ago. Okay, so we do know that something is taking place. We also do know that it has some sociological implications, political implications, and economic implications. Okay, what we haven't talked much about is how do it affect people psychologically, which is our business, right? And of course, as a liberation psychology myself, I understand that you cannot separate sociology, politics, or economic. In fact, politics for me is those who control the power, those who control the economic control the power. Okay, so that's what politics, the definition of politics for me is. So they have to have some kind of impact, right? So what we're trying to do is to try to, run through some studies in which, we can see that there is some changes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about structural balance. I'm going to give you the definition. And then after that, trying to give you some kind of maybe just because kind of actions if you wish, okay? So this is kind of, we have to do a little thingy for the CEUs, how we're doing classes, the professional thing, okay, well, the objective, blah, 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 but, usually the objective is whatever you take with you. That's objective, okay? Can you take something with you? Rather than put all these little things in here, okay? But I had to do it for the CEUs, okay? So global warming has been defined. The United Nations, talk about the whole idea of the climate is changing. We can see it. The sea levels are rising. If I remember as a kid when in Puerto Rico, there was only one place that reached 100 degrees, in the summer, and now that's all over the island, So something is happening, something is taking place, okay? We used to be that we go to Puerto Rico during the winter, there was kind of nice, 70s, now it's still all year round, 80s, 90s, 100, okay? So something is taking place. So global warming is there, and we know that if you look at what happened in Europe last year during the summer, you also will see there was, high temperatures. So the United Nations recognized it, okay? Now, structural balance is very interesting because most people don't talk about structural balance, but structural balance is when, socioeconomic, political, and psychological process violate human rights. And I want you to kind of think about during Katrina, who got affected the most? During Maria, who got affected the most? If you go to Texas, do you see the couple of hurricanes coming out? Stephanie, all those kind of who usually get affected the most? Usually are poor people. Usually are people who do not have much resources. Okay, and in fact, in the United States are also people of color. Okay, so that's what we refer to structural balance. In which changes in economic, changes in the politics, actually violate human rights because people cannot just pick up and leave, and of course, violence is we don't need to define it very hard, but it's the threats of physical force against one human being or another, okay? And usually, this violence usually results in trauma. And it's kind of interesting because and sometimes we think about trauma only as something physical, but trauma can also be part of racism, oppression, sexism, that also ended into trauma. Aggression, is not defined by psychologists that tend to harm one person or another, or the wishes to avoid to be harmed. And then this is an interesting one, and this is coming out of a couple of articles who I got at the end of the presentation, who actually, have a summary of all of this. Eco-migration is when one group, migrate because of physical, economic, or political instability. We've been talking about this, the wars in the Middle East, in which people have been moving and those immigrants cannot be accepted by anybody, or we close the doors, that could be eco-migration. In here, one of the things that we noticed also, and I saw that people who live on the coast, how many people left New Orleans during Katrina? How many people left Puerto Rico during Maria? And some of the people never returned, and some of these people go and look at it and they move to places in which there's no familiar for them, and people really didn't want them there, okay? So that creates an interesting kind of dilemma as well. Um, so I don't know where this comes from because that was supposed to be there. Okay. Uh, oh, I know what happened. Okay. I was erasing it. um, so this is probably the history between warmer weather and violence, have been around for a while, okay? Miles, Novello, and Anderson, talk about the relationship between aggressions, is documented even from Roman times and to the 1740 in Europe, okay? Um, Now, what is interesting also is, even though this is talking about 1740, it was an article in 1987 who actually started to look at the duration of the direct relationship between violence, rape, and heat. So we start back in the 80s. We start to look a little bit in terms of this. This was real. Start to collect data. Um, Not too long ago, last year, the South Africa Journal of Medicine, look at 16 articles to connect a direct relationship between suicide and warmer temperatures. Okay, and they actually mentioned it's higher for men than it is for women. Okay, and then this year it came out another article who actually go back to Miles Novello and Anderson, and actually kind of summarize the findings that the Miles Novello and Anderson find in their previous research article. Okay, so this is three important pieces. Okay, and this is kind of will be the nitty gritty of this. Okay, hot temperatures do affect aggression directly. Okay, and I want you to kind of think about when it's very hot. When you're very hot, what's usually you mood? We get a little, irritated, the kid said something, we maybe scream, because we don't feel comfortable, we're sweaty, we're feeling a little icky kind of thing, and we don't usually like to do that, right? We also know if you listen to the news and away from politics, but if you look in terms of the regular, what happened in California right now? California, Washington, Oregon, all the states, have a big drop, and ended with those fire. They usually have seasonal fires that is bigger than ever, and uncontrollable whatsoever, And I want you to kind of think about what happened with all those people who lost all their houses and all the wet leaves. They usually migrate. They go somewhere else, okay? And I want to kind of think in terms also of the eco-migration in how they affect the behavior between the groups themselves. If you live in a place that have little resources, you more than likely, if you're running out of water, if you're running out of food, your instinct to survive gonna kick in. And usually what that means is you may push somebody out of the line so you can be able to get a little water, or you may get a little food, okay? So you can think in that sense, you will see how this is a direct relationship already. So the direct impact, we can see again, one of the most common and the impact effect is that people become irritable, okay? And you experience yourself. I mean, so somebody who lived in the tropics for a long, long time, I know, my family is poor. When I go home, they don't have air conditioners, and I feel it, So I mean, it's kind of, so you get a little snappy, okay? Like, okay, right? The other thing is that, the studies that I'm talking about have shown that there's increasing aggressivity in terms of people once the temperature go up. And I want you to kind of think in terms of violence and particular different zones of the United States. Mainly, the biggest temperature change usually is in the south of the United States. What we know about the south of the United States, who are the largest population of the south of the United States? Usually people of color, And interesting enough, it's also an interesting relationship between warmer climate and alcohol use. Okay, and I know that during the pandemic, one of the things that we have noticed, interesting enough, is that we have had in the United States, we have had with the COVID an increase in domestic violence, an increase of substance abuse. Okay, so so something that for us to think about, you know. So so like aggressivity also can be measured on scale, starting with being irritable, aggression, and violence. And you know, I mean, you know how you ever heard people, you know, how pissed are you? And you say a little pissed or very pissed, you know. Kind of. So it's the same thing that you start, you know, a little uncomfortable, eventually kind of reach somebody, and eventually you're trying to fix somebody's nose, you know. So you can see that go, you know, depending how comfortable and uncomfortable you are, how much the propensities for violence will be. I mentioned this just earlier, you know, in terms of some regions in the United States are hotter than others. I mentioned the South, and I also mentioned there's a relationship in terms of where people end up living. And I want you to kind of think in it. You have people, or people of color, who usually, you know, it's a disparity between people of color and income, okay? And you're gonna see that usually, you know, people go to places in with the cheaper housing, okay? Usually the people who enter the cheaper housing, because of the disparity with income, people of color usually are people of color, okay? So it's another interesting piece in terms of that you know, this warming climate and this change of behavior usually seems to be more common among people of color, okay? And it's not that people of color are more violent, because the people of color live in places that get warmer than other places, okay? I always kind of thinking about this, my students about if they know the school to prison pipe. Some studies who say school to prison pipe is linked to slavery, and a lot of students kind of get surprised, you know, because when slavery stopped, you know, slavery didn't stop. They just changed hands, and we changed the system to put people of color in jail, but yet they don't show any more psychopathology than the rest of the world. Okay, so anyhow, I just a caveat. So this is kind of interesting. You know, you have two different kind of indirect. Okay, one of the indirect, you know, is called you know, strictly related to structural violence. You know, this is related to poverty, dysfunctional family, neighborhood violence, wars, and bad. Any of you ever seen Boys in the Hood? You ever seen? Check it out. Boys in the Hood is very interesting because Boys in the Hood, you know, it's a scene in Boys in the Hood in which, you know, Furious talking with his son talk about, you know, look around in here, you know, and he looked and there was kind of a liquor store in almost every corner, you know. And what he talked about is that kind of structural violence, you know, because you put, you know, a liquor store in every corner, you know, of the poor neighborhood. What are you doing? You're actually kind of encouraging the use of alcohol, and it's cheap too. Okay, so so I think that we can see that in you know, in some neighborhood in which you can see that piece is there. Okay. Now, the major points associated in the results of global warming have to do with violence and food insecurity. Okay. If we have a drought, if we have a flood, usually it's shortage of food. Okay. And by the way, during the pandemic, who do you think is feeding us? Migrant workers, farm workers, mainly of Latin descent. Okay, and they had continued to work, you know, and so they still kind of feeling. It's an interesting movie also called The Day Without a Mexican, and The Day Without a Mexican also kind of talk about the day in which, you know, if the Mexicans would not come here to work for low wages, you know, we wouldn't eat. Okay, economic depravity, succession to terrorism, and preference to the group to which we identify. Okay, which you can see create interesting differences. You know, and you can see right now we live in a very interesting system right now in which you don't look like me, you don't sound like me, you must be a terrorist, you must be, a non grata person, okay? Which is kind of the whole idea of divide and conquest, always, always in the multicultural class issue said, if I don't stand for my siblings who are different from me, but they also come from people of color, then I stand against my own people as well. Okay, so we have to stand together and don't try to get that divide and conquest. In fact, that's most of the colonizing do divide and conquest. The other part of the within the same group, members of this group also develop some aggressive behaviors, such as a group within that concerning behaviors such as defensiveness. And when you kind of think about this, okay, when I start to kind of feel defensive about something, something must not be right. Severe aggression against members of all the groups, okay. The development of structured violence, which can actually eventually can lead to civil warfare. And I want you to kind of think about very, very careful about, every time we deny that it's not climate change, the climate change is not affecting our behavior, we move a little bit. In South America, the guy who developed the liberation psychology movement, Ignacio Martin Barro, was talking about a civil war in San Salvador 10 years before it happened, because he was looking at how the structural violence was leading to real violence. Okay, so climate change, migration, increased conflict. And if you've been watching, what happened in the Middle East, you're gonna see and the people in here, people who are no longer want to confront another Katrina. People go and move to places, they're not necessarily places, they welcome them, okay? And that will increase some kind of conflicts as well. So in the Miles, Novello, and Anderson article, they present this global warming, and this is kind of increased heat, drought, extreme weather, sea level rise, flooding, and then they have the direct, which is again, the whole idea of being irritable, and then a little bit more than that, they become a little bit aggressive, and then more than that, will become violent. And then you have the other piece in which you're talking about, the indirect piece, crop, natural disaster, economic instability, poverty, eco-migration, and that come into a different kind of thing. Violence from adults, prenatal and postnatal development problems, intergroup conflict, civil, political unrest, refugees, internally, displacement of people, resource competition, and all of that ended into violent crime, intergroup violence, civil war, terrorism, international war. And I want you to kind of think in terms of if you see some of these pieces taking place in our own backyard right now, okay? And what, most people don't want to connect it with global warming, we can say that yes, indeed, global warming maybe have an effect on what's happening in this country as well, okay? No questions so far? Okay, cool, all right. This coming of the American Psychological Association, I know we counselors, but if you look in terms of this little chart, you will see, how, after some storm draws, and hurricanes or whatever, the scenes that they affect the whole piece, have mental health impact, have physical health impact, and community health impact. Usually we look more at the physical than anything else, particularly because in the United States is how much it's going to cost, as if money can change everything, and that's not necessarily true, okay? But we need to kind of pay attention in which, that affect the whole, it's very holistic, okay? One area affect the other. When we talk about mental health, one of the things that's very interesting is that for the longest, we thought there was mental health only, but we know right now there's exercise. We know you have a good spiritual sense that you become 100%. But if you only concentrate on one piece and one piece only, then you're not completing the holistic circle, okay? So this is the pieces that I'm suggesting, okay? It is true that many people have talked about raising awareness, And raising awareness is very interesting. So raising awareness, lead to action. When I talk about raising awareness, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, in terms of being awake. Think about when you're awake. When you, for the first time, when you get up in the morning and you're awake, what do you have to do other than go to the bathroom? You have to move, right? You have to move. So once you raise awareness, I cannot, earlier we were talking about talking stick and walking stick kind of thing, right? I mentioned to the host, one of my students when I was in Florida, give me a walking stick. And he told me that the walking stick was because I walk the walk, don't talk the talk. One of the reasons why I walk the walk is because once I know that something is wrong, there's some kind of injustice. I mean, in fact, if you look at the bottom of my signature block, you see that it said that one of the most beautiful traits of a revolutionary is to feel in their own skin the suffering of the oppressed. Okay, that's Ernesto Che Guevara. Okay, so. But anyhow, so the idea is once you start to kind of think, you create a consciousness that you become awake. Okay, and according to Pablo Freire, one of the things that we need to do first is to why strong. When we start to feel that kind of thing, I mean, it's kind of like when I go home and it's December and it's still 100 degrees outside, it's a different from when I was a kid. If this is right, if this is okay, right, and not, and then that piece takes me into reflection. Once I start to reflect, then I start to create critical thinking. And critical thinking is what academia was supposed to be about, by the way. Not was to, tell me how high, I'll tell you how to jump, but, I can tell you how high, right? Critical thinking, once you create critical thinking, you have to ask the right questions. Why this is it? It's like racism. When I listen to the radio, and I start to hear all the sexist comments, I cannot stop with thinking, why is this allowed? Okay? So that's going to create consciousness. Once you're conscious, it's when you awake, and guess what do? Just the same thing when you get up in the morning. Even if only go to the bathroom, you move, okay? So this is an interesting piece in terms of how we listen and how we establish dialogue. So the first thing is to try to communicate. And by the way, when I talk about communicate, I know that when I finished my master, I thought that I was, 6 foot tall. Okay, I only 5'5", so I thought I was 6 foot tall, right? Until my mother kind of slapped me a couple of times and said, you're gonna be my son no matter how old you are, okay? So you better shut up and listen, okay? So that calmed me down, okay? But usually we have this little interesting thing in academia in which it means kind of the difference between a PhD and ADD. It's like, okay, so one is better than the other because, or SID versus a PhD, no, communication is to be established in the same way. Have to be egalitarian, okay? In order to be egalitarian, we need to understand that we have to respect and being humble, okay? The more humble that you are, the better off you are, okay? You need to be critical. When I'm about to talk critical, it's not critical like the United States. Every time somebody criticizes you, you think you're doing something. No, be critical is to be analytical. What works, what doesn't work, why it doesn't make any sense, and has to clarification, okay? You have to be specific, okay? This is what I'm going to do, okay? You have to reflect, and once you do all of that, maybe and just maybe, you wake up. This is an interesting piece, okay? And this is also a justice thing, okay? So this is just, the first thing is we need to talk about validating experiences. And this is an interesting piece. The battery in the United States is very individualistic, So sometimes I think that my experience is bigger than yours. That's not true. Both experiences are equal. In fact, one experience should support the other, okay? The individualistic thinking do not help us, So where my individual experience is important, is as important as my group. And my group experience is as important as mine. Did I make sense of that, or I'm driving you a little crazy? Experiences cannot be measured. You ever heard that? I know this is going to sound horrible, but people measuring, who's best, or there was one time in which who was sicker than the other. Remember the self-help groups? Everyone will be sick, So I'm sicker than you are, or and it usually work the other way as well. Where I'm not taught because my problems are not as bad as everybody else in the group, right? So what I'm trying to say is the one is no better than the other. They're equally important. Okay. The other piece is this control colonial narrative. Colonial narrative have to do with individualistic. Colonial narrative have to do with economics. Colonial narrative have to do, how much we love to be accredited, take rep accreditation kind of thing, right? But it's very interesting because it's dictating from the top down. This colonial narrative said there was knowledge before. Okay, so where's that knowledge? If I look back right now in terms of what my grandmother used to tell me, when my mother used to tell me, there was knowledge there. Okay, and now kind of interesting. Remember the little tea you drink? My grandmother used to do a little tea. It tastes like horrible, with honey, and now they commercialize. So now it's cool to have it, So there was knowledge that was before us. So that's what that just colonial narrative means, So the idea that, okay, we have something to offer, okay? In fact, when we talk about this control colonial narrative, in the classroom, one of the things that I'm trying to tell my students is that the idea of creating critical thinking is to challenge me. But not to challenge me for the sake of challenging me, but to challenge me so they know where the information comes from, okay? And I know that in some places, if you challenge the professor, you don't pass the class. So, yeah, because it's a top down. And what I'm saying is both have some important things, okay? This is a piece that we don't teach much. Who have the power? When we talk about who have the power, okay, we need to understand. And I want you to kind of think about this. If the power is fluid, that's okay. But if the power is only one person or one group, something is wrong. Okay? So when we talk about this piece is, okay, so when we're talking about Greenpeace, when we're talking about green power, in terms of changing the environment, who's stopping that? And it's the people who have the power, who really have the power. You want to know who have the power in the United States? Look at the Congress and tell me how many people of color and how many women do you see? And you see the few the problem Marines, right? So this is important. And then this is another interesting piece, which I think that is important as well. Little things you can do. You have something to offer. You know what your superpower is. Use it. I was mentioning that after Katrina, after Maria, I got Maria and Katrina kind of messed up because it's reminding me, both of them, how much tragic they were. But after Maria, one of the things that people did in Puerto Rico was they started to buy bottled water, right? Because they need it, right? So one of the things that I did after everything was sterilized was to buy a filter. So I don't have to buy bottled water because that contaminant, that added to the whole thing of global warming, okay? Simple things, I bought a bike to go to work. I have, one of those little, which I exercise at the same time, which is kind of cool, So what can you do? What's your superpower? No, I was kind of thinking about not all of us can go there and stand and march and, go there, kind of thing. Some of us are not made. Some of us have family at home, that we have to take care of, but what can you do? I think always as an academic, I believe that the superpower our academic have is the ability to actually to continue to create critical thinking with our students, because that's our superpower, to continue to educate, to continue to do the things that we know better. So anyhow, let me see. So before I give you your little, your little reference, questions, concerns, comments. Let me stop this. Okay, they have some questions here in the chat. Let's see. I recently read a book about capitalism and slavery. It's scary how a lot of earlier mechanics, but yes, it's colonization. I mean, in fact, we would not have lived in this country that was for slavery, because we still do it with many of the. I mean, by the way, slavery is the well-known one, but you remember the low-pay Asians who were here to build the railroad, and right now we do it with the Mexicans, so I think that without that piece, but this is an interesting piece. One of the things that when we talk about this conversation is to recover your historical memory. Our historical memory has been written by whom? The cowboys or the Indians? The cowboys, right? So it's been written by the cowboys. There's some piece missing on that history. Okay, so we need to go back and try to find out. I always love the idea that people think that the history is something the past will never return. But if you look in terms of how they colonized, and how we, look at that new movement in terms of stop talking about racism and implicit bias. Okay, what that's trying to do is race history. Why, no one's not long ago, the Texas school district didn't want to teach about slavery. That's erasing historical memory. So I think that's where that piece comes from. Okay, let's see what else. So, do you have recommendations to how to bring this into counseling? It seems important. Yes, we bring this into counseling. At least the way I bring it into counseling is the one is not detached from the other. If I'm talking about social justice and activism and action, I have to also talk about the environment, because one is tied to the other. I think that the biggest interesting piece that they're trying to convince us is that we cannot talk and walk and shoot them at the same time. We're very complex beings, okay? So we can do more than one thing at a time, okay? The interesting piece is if you're talking and walking, people make you believe that you're not concentrating, And by the way, most of the people in the chat beside me, I think, are women, I remember my mother used to multitask. She was cooking, she was keeping an eye on us, and she was also doing something else for work, And I said, my mother was doing it all the time. So multitask. Most women know how to multitask. I know that. Okay. You got kids, you know how to multitask. Okay. So how come is that if we're doing two things, we're not concentrating? So how does we bring it to counseling? One cannot be isolated from the other. If I talk about this colonization, I need to talk about structural bias. I need to talk about repairing the historical memory, and I need to talk about the whole idea of global warming, because I cannot deal with violence unless I understand where it comes from. Okay. So let me see. Somebody here said, interesting way to exercise raising awareness about how much. Oh, they got a little link in here in terms of Sheena Barcenas. I put it in the chat. Okay. Talking the Annabelle Miss Sue. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. I hate to do that, but sometimes I just don't know how to pronounce it. Talk about James Baldwin instead of history is the present. Yeah. Okay. What about schools? Schools are an interesting piece. I mean, I was mentioning that earlier that the one of the things that we have done now with accreditation is that we have moved away with we all want to be mental health counselors. Prevention starts in the school. So I would love schools to start to revamp their curriculum and start to teach a real history. Okay. I think a school counselor can be very instrumental to that. Okay. Most school counselors that I know usually end up being administrator, by the way. I don't know what is that, but most of them that I met end up being vice principal and principal. Something about school counselors, they're interested to move that. But I will look in terms of how that will, present it. I used to do a group with my kids in high school. There was an average school, and then eventually I moved into a elementary school. And one of the things that I used to do is, I made love to hear, was the talk about the ancestry. What people knew, how did they know, and that even though what I was trying to do was build self-esteem, it was also giving them a real piece of the history. Okay. Cool. Any more questions? don't talk about the same time as 20 of you and only one of me, okay? So, any comment?
I am muted myself. Is that okay?
Yeah, ask.
Thank you so much for this. It's a very relevant topic and very insightful presentation. I think something that I said, that I stated in the chat, is that I really believe that we need to act as a profession in terms of this is so big and so important. I mean, it's going to come to an existential crisis, literally. I mean, as the years unfold. And as you mentioned, this is, I mean, maybe not directly, but indirectly related to mental health. In not just because of aggression, but as well as soon as your resources, I mean, people that, I mean, are deprived of food, they don't have a place where to live. All those are challenges that are going to impact mental health. So I think we really need to act as a profession. And you mentioned the idea of structural violence, which I find it very interesting, and how we can kind of, we try to conceptualize what means peace, you know, not just the, I mean, the absence of physical violence, but in a way, I think as a profession, we need to move towards what is positive peace. I mean, Galtung mentioned two types of peace: negative peace, where you just take away the physical violence, and positive peace, where you literally address the structural violence. And in a way, not taking care of climate change, for me, it is an act of violence, because that is going to impact people's lives. I'm very passionate, so I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, so I'm going to shut up.
No, that's okay, because I think that you hit the nail right in the head. You know, it's the kind of thing. You know, if you look in terms of allowing this to take place, I shouldn't say an act of violence, because there's not violence to people who have less. You know, there's not like, you know, people of color, women, you know, poor people. You know, that's an act of violence, because you're taking, you know, some things that people take it for granted. You know, I mean, if you live in a penthouse with air conditioner, you know, and you never, you know, get your head out of your penthouse, you know, you will never, you know, kind of experience this. But the rest of the world does, you know. So I think that's well taken, you know. It is you know, and that's what I said. The San Salvadorian priest Ignacio Martin Barro, that's what he was saying. You know, in fact, one of the things that he did, you know, which is where our concept come from the South, not come from North America, okay? Even though we thought we discovered social justice 20 years ago, some people down there already discovered, and South Africa as well, okay? So one of the things that's very interesting was that he was saying that, you know, that in order to do something, you have to go and be part of the community. You know, you have to work with the community. So he worked with the, you know, with the farmer. He worked with the poor. You know, so he not only preached from the pulpit, he went to the community. And I think that that's the piece that sometimes we can do. I think that sometimes we have some limitations, and that's what I said. That what is your superpower? You know, what's your audience? What's the people you can work with? You know, and I think that sometimes what happens is, just like when you write a dissertation, they're supposed to make a big difference for a profession. That's BS. That's a lie. You know. You know. So what you have to understand is you want to kind of be intentionally, and you have to be able to know where your audience is and how you're going to reach them. Okay. I cannot, you know, deal with politicians, you know. So that's not my audience, okay? That's somebody else. I got a friend who's very good with politicians, okay? But I'm good at our community. So, so I think that that's the piece. What is your superpower? Well, you know, how you going, you know, take the bull by the horn and move it away, you know, from your standpoint. And I think, again, you know, sometimes we think, you know, I mean, I always wanted to play basketball, right? But I'm 5'5". So that's why I went for boxing, you know. So, so you know, so I have to understand what my limitations are, you know, and understand what I can do. So
it's not too late.
No, I kind of like boxing better though. I was good at it. So, you know, because I'm Puerto Rican, you know, it's in my blood. Oh, anything else, friends? I mean, this is, I mean, again, I think that this is, you know, we can reshape this as we go along, but I think that also you want to kind of think about the discolonization piece. Because the discolonization piece, you know, is the piece in which we don't become indoctrinated in something that is not who we are. The whole idea of problematization is to create critical thinking. Critical thinking is to asking why. I know in counseling psychotherapy we're supposed to ask why, but I love why, you know? Why now? Who? What? Who said that? I mean, why? You know, prove it to me, you know? You know, so that's the pieces, you know, in which you kind of, you know, most of us, education is supposed to be a power because knowledge is supposed to be power. But if the education has been contaminated and the only thing that they feed in you is something that they want to fit you, then you become a robot to something that you don't want to be part of. No. No more questions, huh? Tell me, Tina.
Say again.
Oh, somebody said if I have, yes, I actually, did the PowerPoint gonna be shared with the group? Yes?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Did the PowerPoint gonna be to share with the group?
We can post on the website.
Oh, okay.
We
Because
can surely do that.
okay. No, because somebody asked about the reading recommendation, and actually I got four I shared. It's gonna be in the PowerPoint as well, but you know, let me share that with everybody. This is the articles from where I got it from. This information. They actually kind of lead toward. If anybody want to read about liberation psychology or discolonization, and you can email me directly. You know, and my email is my first name, dot Torres Rivera, all together, at Wichita, which is WICHITA.edu. Thank you. So let me see. Somebody said to check. Yeah, I can do that too. Okay. Okay, hold on. I go and check the PowerPoint right now too. So Franny just you know came to the rescue and said, "Oh, you can do this." Okay, it's all loading, so everybody should have it. But again, but if you went to specific readings about, I don't want to promote that, but we just wrote a book about liberation psychology as well. So, but anyhow, so anything else, anything for the good of the cause, or you know, anything that you know would like to question, challenge, you suck, all the kind of things, you know, that come with all that kind of things, you know. Hey, this is the truth, you know. I mean, sometimes you have to be honest. I'm also very established, which I love honesty, you know. I prefer somebody, you know, tell me honestly what they feel, you know, than lie to me for the rest of my life, you know. That's torture. Hello.
Okay. Anyone have any questions?
Bridget Rivera said a lot of environmentalists, especially those of color, struggle emotionally due to the being so knowledgeable about these issues. Have this been in any research conducted in a specific group? APA had done a really good job. I think ACA actually have a group which I was part of, and Julie Daniels was part of that group. But I don't know if there have been a specific research in terms of specific populations other than the one that I mentioned before. But that's, you know, you know, I will do a little research and see, because that's true. You know, it's the same thing. Even for almost most people of color, anything that is not mainstream, you know, gonna make you suffer a little bit. So. That's the last question from me. Oh, sorry. So
All right.
I was supposed to read that. Okay.
All right. Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, if we don't have any additional questions, we just want to thank you so much for being here today with us. Thank you, Dr. Adil Rivera. You've been phenomenal. I definitely learned so much. And I think it's a topic we definitely need to continue to learn more about. I think it's already in the chat, but the upcoming webinars we have November 5th with Dr. Judy Daniels and Dr. Rebecca Toporek, and also one coming up in December. So please stay tuned for those. And we thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great day.
I'm good. Take care.